Dr. Keolu Fox, come on up. He is a professor at the University of California, San Diego, and also at Queen's Hospital in Oahu, correct? All right.
All right, we're going to be going in a different direction here. For those of you who attended our Earth-Friendly Computation session last night, I've shared some AI mid-journey generated art here. And you would know that this thing actually uses as much information to, as much energy to, anyways, it's terrible for the environment. But today's talk is going to be about disrupting the indigenous DNA supply chain. And I'm going to talk to you about some new projects and things that we're working on. All right. First, I'm the current director of the UCSD Indigenous Futures Institute. And I'm originally from Kohala, Hawaii, which is the district that we're in right now, which is a really beautiful place, and there are all kinds of people. Speaking of admixture, this is a really interesting place. There's a lot of people that came from Tahiti, settled this place, brought a lot of different cultures, and recombined their genomes with people from Madeira and Japan and Okinawa and all over the world. I encourage you guys to enjoy it. It's beautiful. It's also one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It has the most diverse soil profiles in the world. We have green sand beaches, black sand beaches, many, many things like that. I encourage you to see them. They're stunning. And it is also the extinction capital and the invasive species capital all at once, which is something to think about when you're here. Tread lightly and think about how you're contributing to our economy and the biodiversity that exists here. And there's a very complicated relationship with the United States government as well. Hawaii, though, as far as human beings go, is one of the most diverse places in America, and we're reluctantly part of America. And this county, Hawaii County, in the census data is ranked #1. Who knew that? Put your hand up. Okay, yeah. Followed by Maui County, #2, Kauai, and then Honolulu County. So I thought that's a really interesting metric. When we think about admixture and we think about delivering the fruits of precision medicine, things become really, really complicated really, really fast here in Hawaii. Yet, we all know that there's a dearth of diversity data. This is just a screen grab from Melinda Mills' GWAS Diversity Monitor. And you can see that the people in the other mixed category is very limited. But the interesting statistic to me is always who is doing the sequencing? Who is outsourcing their biological information and their samples to which sequencing center? And in one of the papers from this website, we could see that 72% of genetic discoveries have taken place in 3 countries. And that is really telling and interesting. And what that means is that many, many, many different cultures are outsourcing their biological information, their genealogy, and that is being processed in different genome sequencing centers across planet Earth. And we're discovering incredible new types of variation in historically marginalized communities. And this is from Sarah Tishkoff. It's an incredible review for the students in here. I highly recommend taking a look at this, but you could see some of the things that we're discovering. We're understanding natural selection in humanity in new ways. And there are incredible mutations like this FADS1 mutation that was discovered in Greenland, high elevation adaptation in EPAS1 in Nepal and Tibet. Even mutations found here privately in Polynesia, like this CREBRF mutation that looks like it predisposes to obesity but protects against type 2 diabetes. And once you start to identify many of these interesting mutations, you could think about applying them in different therapeutic settings, and that's really, really exciting. Barack Obama knew this. That's why he started the All of Us program. which has led to a major new effort in sequencing diverse communities of people, Regeneron knows this, that's why they're stacking the deck for genetic discovery, and thinking about the development of new therapies using natural selection and geographical sequestration of these communities as the guide. But there's a darker side to the story as well. Vertex Pharmaceuticals, for example, worked directly with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, recruited patients, sequenced their genomes, turned that around, created new IP, and sold it back to them for, you guessed it, $300,000. And that explains how complicated the healthcare landscape is in this country, which we all know because of what happened recently in New York City. And this is a reflection of how complex it can be to develop drugs based on new intellectual property. And I work at University of California, which is one of the largest holders of intellectual property in America, if not the world. And it speaks to some of the challenges that we're coming up against. We know that when 23andMe was a healthy, thriving company, they were able to sell their database, access to it at least, to GSK for $300,000, or $300 million, excuse me. We also know that Blackstone acquired Ancestry.com for $4.7 billion, meaning that there's a steady increase in the value of that information over time, that it's medically actionable. It leads to new IP. It's a new pathway to accelerate research and development. But again, there's also another side of the coin, which is what happens when you don't include the communities that provided that information for you in the process. It begins to be a mirror image of other extractive colonial relationships around resources. Think of Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. You know, we could start with wood, fossil fuels, critical earth minerals. And that IP is extremely valuable. Who's been to Illumina's headquarters in San Diego? UTC. This is in the lunchroom. What you're seeing are all the patents that are on the wall. And according to this piece in Nature in 2018, remember this is pre-pandemic, there were approximately 45,000 patents filed worldwide that mention DNA sequencing. And what I see here is less a, I don't know, like a fun thing that's inspirational to look at while you're having lunch, and more of like a hunting lodge. It looks like a bunch of moose heads up there. But it's something to think about when you think about what the market cap of this company is and where and what this IP is leading to. And that's why it's really, really, really important that when we build projects, we understand that data is a resource, just like water, just like timber, just like critical earth minerals. And that resource offers opportunities for economic development. And for myself and a lot of the different groups and organizations and institutions that I work with, including Queen's Hospital, which outsources so much of its diagnostic workflow to the mainland. It's really about vertically integrating technology locally that enables capacity building. And that's what we saw with Henry Ford and the development of the Model T, which revolutionized transportation. This is what we saw with a little bookstore that was online that turned into your largest cloud computation provider, which is Amazon Web Services. Vertical integration of stacks of technology is the way to go if you want to be in control of your resources, of your assets. We know that at Native Biodata Consortia. That's why we built the first genome sequencing center and data center on a reservation in US history, and we've put our communities in pole control. That is why organizations like the Indian Health Service does not participate in all of us, because there's a tension and a history of exploitation. You can talk to me about that later if you like. But I wanted to continue with the book club theme. Is that gentleman here? The book club guy? I don't know. Oh, there you are. There you are, sir. I'm a huge believer as well, sir. And I love all of these books, and I wanted to share some of them. Some of them are newer. One of them is called Patenting Life. Check this out. It just came out, Georgetown Press. It covers everything from the row with Mary Claire King and Myriad to the more recent kind of knockdown, drag-out situation with Jennifer Doudna and MIT. It's a really, really I think, important contribution. Then there are other ones like The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, essential, please read that. And then I just finished Cobalt Red and The Material World. So you can see that I'm taking this whole parallel between data as a resource and management of those things very, very seriously. I encourage you to as well. Okay, now I kind of want to get to 3 little projects that we're working on here in the Pacific, and I'll kind of accelerate through them, and then I want to get to some questions. One of them is about paths and timing of the peopling of Polynesia. One of the central questions that I've always been interested in, and you must know that we're here in Hawaii and somebody came here first, and it was Polynesian people, is how and when this happened. And I've got to work with some incredible people in thinking about where these time estimates come from for what we call the original moonshot. And there are many different lines of evidence that you can use to kind of investigate this, archaeology, applied mathematics, linguistics, etc. Genetics happens to be our favorite here, bioinformatics, and I got to work with Alex. Where's Alex? There you are, Alex. And we got to investigate this at a very high level and think about this and publish this piece in Nature. And it was a joy, and this is work that's continuing to go on. But I think one thing that we need to reflect on is that our diaspora, as Francisco said, shapes our genomes in these unique and beautiful ways, and it is one and the same, a reflection of how far we've come and where we're going and how we're going to die. And that's really important to think about and carry with you long term. Okay, the second little project is about the origins of leprosy bacteria in Oceania. Who knows about kalaupapa on Molokai? You've heard about it, okay, very cool. One of the projects I wanted to work on with Queen's Health Systems and Ann Stone at ASU was thinking about when leprosy arrived here. So kalaupapa is, or was, the largest leprosarium in the world. And we have the arrival of leprosy and the collapse of our population and what many people call a naive soil epidemic. And what we were able to do is sequence the ancient genome of the leprosy bacteria, reconstruct it, and then understand its origins. And it was really fun getting to work in the Ancient Genomics Laboratory over there. It's not in prep, we published it a few years ago. I should have updated that. But it was a really fun collaboration to build with our community here. And many of you have probably read this book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And I'm here to tell you that it's guns, germs, and alleles, and it's germs, germs, germs. But understanding our relationship with how pathogens have shaped our genomes over time is essential for determining what types of therapies we should be thinking about in the near future. And that's from Cook to Cortez. These ideas are applicable to many different indigenous communities. We need to take that very seriously. We can identify all of these incredible bottlenecks. We can think about the different pathogens that have shaped our genomes. And we can think about things like, for example, reduced HLA diversity. And that's kind of a new series of projects that we're working on, identifying the impact of these population collapses and identifying bottlenecks after European contact. This is work from John Lindo and Ripon Mali. And thinking about that in a larger context. And maybe you followed these 4 stories that came out from S.K. Villerslev that were focused on MS. But it's creating this whole new trajectory of how we think about drug development and understanding our past, even layering ancient genomic data sets along with modern population genetics data. Okay, finally, I'll tell you about a project that I started the last time, maybe 2 years ago when we first got here to PSB, and it's the gout epidemic in French Polynesia. This is a partnership that we've been working with the Vice President of Polynesia and Variant Bio on for the last few years. It took us to Tahiti, which if you surf is incredible, really beautiful place, incredible food, and just an incredible culture, and they were so welcoming. And thinking about this problem before we got to the genetics was, what actually is the prevalence of gout in French Polynesia? It's not exactly an easy question epidemiologically. And so we kind of broke that down, and we determined and published in the Lancet Global Health that gout is estimated to affect 1 in 7 individuals in French Polynesia, which is crazy if you think about that for a second. So if you're me, you're asking yourself why. Why is this happening? And so we worked tirelessly to create some larger data sets, some mid-pass genome data sets, and we created a beautiful cohort that included all of the different island archipelagos in French Polynesia. We complemented our mid-pass data with all kinds of incredible high-resolution phenotype data using point-of-care technologies like Myoton, and then old school stuff too, like paper-based diagnostics. We've published a new series of papers, and we have ongoing things that are coming out. Some of them are focused on the basic epidemiology. Some of them are focused on the HLA diversity that we're identifying, and candidates abound, including clinical trials. And some of them are focused more on aspects of why community consultation matters in deploying benefit sharing models, or, what are the most proper ways to share your results with communities that you're working with over time. We had some really interesting variation that we've discovered in HLA, some really cool alleles that have popped up that have been associated with it in the past, gout that is. Kind of go through that. And then we've started a new project with Alex and Cole Shanks at UCSC, and we're looking at ancestry-specific genetic variation and allele sharing in Polynesian populations. And you can just look at this comparison in panel B and see how bottlenecked many of the communities we're working with. We know Finland has a major bottleneck, and we're just enjoying this brand new rich data set. But I should say that none of this is possible without the help of Variant Bio, which I'm a senior advisor for. And I would think about this for a moment. We've been able to work with 25 different indigenous communities all around the world. We have accelerated research and development and created rich, diverse data sets at a pace that's unprecedented since 2018. And the reason is because we take benefit sharing very seriously. And if you're not familiar with this idea, the idea is sharing percentage of proceeds from the profits of the potential commodification of the data that you created. So linking it all the way back to that idea about resources, this isn't a new idea though. When I fish with my uncles, when we come home, we clean our fish and we take it to people that need that fish. We don't just stock our freezer, right? So that idea is applicable in a lot of different ways. And when I published this piece, being a bit critical of the All of Us program and saying, hey, you guys are just putting this data up on servers and it's getting driven over the goal line by big pharma, and you're not really protecting the individuals who have made this possible. I was very critical about that. People thought I was crazy to popularize or try to socialize the idea of benefit sharing, even though it's an ancient indigenous concept. And it works in short-term ways where we have the application of this to get people new wells for water access in places like Madagascar. It can also work in more long-term ways. One of the things we do is we provide free access to any drug that we create. That's unprecedented. So I wanted to play you guys a little video, because I said I was going to do this last time I was here. But how many people think that this strategy will work? Put your hand up. Okay. How many think that it won't? Okay. Cool. Cool. Because you're dead wrong. So if you check the New York Times today, you'll see that we just locked up a $50 million partnership with one of the hottest big pharma companies in the world. And they'll be sharing 4% of our research dollars with indigenous communities who will be buying back their land from their colonizers, the exact same land that shaped their genomes in the first place. And that's poetic justice. Thank you. So you got to believe. Somebody told me that we're bringing the good trouble to population genetics, and I think we are. But I would also say we have this saying, and I'll leave you guys with this. In Hawaii, we say, know the big currents and the little currents. So we focused over the last few years, since 2018, on this big idea and disrupting a field. And it's not just some, DEI pity party. Like, yes, diversity matters. I don't care what President Trump says, right? It does. But when it makes financial sense, and we're brokering relationships like that, I think what it does is it forces the Regenerons of the world and the Vertexes of the world to bend the knee, and we'll see. And many of you people should be putting pressure on them to apply benefit sharing models in the future. So thank you.
And we have 10 minutes for questions before we start the session.
Both talks were really great. Thank you very much for giving those talks. My comment to Keolu on the importance of the non-Hispanic Pacific Islander population in these genetic biorepositories and the protectionist approach that's been taken by some of the Native Hawaiian communities has resulted in there not being a good reference set. And so in the Million Veteran Program, which is not industry funded, it's federally funded, so we have a requirement to give back to everybody. And we have, and as part of the MVP consent, we can't sell the data to Big Pharma. Big Pharma cannot fund any studies of the MVP data. It's a public, it's a federal public resource. So there's 7,000 Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders in the Million Veteran Program, which is I think one of the largest Native Hawaiian genetic biorepositories. So we are trying to do local ancestry, but there's not a good reference set. And I think it's really important for people of like Songan communities to understand, particularly with GLP-1 inhibitors, how these different NHPI populations may metabolize drugs differently. And we can't do that because of the protectionist approach. And so, there are benefits, but there are also costs. And so I would just encourage you to also think about the costs with protectionist approaches.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that, one thing that's ongoing is we are building a more robust reference panel in a number of different directions with Queens. And so it'll be pretty cool. But I see what all of us is doing, trying to sneak in data sets from Nevada, from our diaspora and stuff, without our consent. That's nasty. Okay, yes.
Yeah, thanks for both talks. Just to add a little more color to the cystic fibrosis story, when Vertex was developing that drug, I was working very closely with the senior scientist who said the drug will cost about $60,000 a year. And when I asked him why did it cost $300,000, he said because the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation asked them to jack the price up so they could sell the futures for billions of dollars. So, their claim, the Cystic CF Foundation, was that we will then be able to do a lot more research, but they were playing the same game that we keep playing, and so this cycle has to be interrupted. I often say it has to be interrupted from the primary funder, the NIH, because it incentivizes all this bad behavior, essentially. No offense to anybody from the NIH here.
None taken. No, I'm joking. But I think that it's deplorable, that whole relationship. I think that there's a new consciousness around how our healthcare system is not broken. It's designed to support those relationships. So we all know that.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. I hope we can chat later. I wanted to know your thoughts on how we could bring benefit sharing to other aspects of our research. So something that I've grappled with for a long time is the fact that I and others use de-identified research in the healthcare system to do all this research when, you know, many of the most vulnerable populations whose data might be there can't even get proper access to care or get denied being seen by specialists, all sorts of things. And so, you know, you have clearly done something amazing, and I hope we can start a conversation around how we take these ideas and expand them, particularly to AI, where data is, you know, king, either with our prospective data collection, having some sort of, you know, do you see that we could expand this, like, beyond just what you've done with genetics?
Definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say the thing we rolled out is perfect. There's been so many compromises we've had to make along the way, but it is clearly disruptive to the status quo. I'm happy to talk to you about like a more contextual, targeted plan, but they're all, I mean, you know, look at your are you even including your collaborators in your author lists? You know, you start there and, and build up. You know, that's all. Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh-oh. No.
See what the right way to say this is. So when you were putting up the admixture slides and the like, the Mexican population and the Native American population look an awful lot alike. And there hasn't been a lot of public data from Native populations. What there's mostly been is public data from populations in Latin America that have high Native ancestry. So would you guys talk a little bit about the tension between the kind of work that Carlos and you have been doing to sort of look at reconstructing history and the interests of the people whose history you claim to be reconstructing?
Yeah, you know, I would say one thing. We have a very US-centric perspective here always. And I acknowledge, you know, the great work that Keolu is doing, but if you go to Mexico, we don't have that. Because Mexico is a continuum spectrum of admixture. And I don't mean that we don't have racism. We do have it. But we don't have this concept, although it has been evolving more recently. You know, there is about 6% of the population that now identify themselves as native in a way. But you know, it's very interesting how in Mexico we don't have this tension, right? And we all know that our genome is a mixture of Europeans and natives, right? So, so something I worry about is, right? First of all, you know, we will just have this question: how do we do genetics on these populations when we don't have good reference panels, or the reference panels are being restricted the access, right? And I can tell you that at Tempus, for example, when we were doing this study, first of all, we have almost no Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islander. You can imagine why. They don't have access to these tests, right? So we basically ignore it, right? But even if we had some, we cannot differentiate them because we don't have that data, right? So, so there is this tension of how do we advance the science, right? And how do we not perpetuate the, I guess, the disparities that we're doing? And in my view, you know, having medicines that work for all is one way to do that. That's not going to solve the problem of access to healthcare. That's a societal problem that is much harder to deal with, unfortunately. I think it's easier the science in a way, although there's always new things, but the societal aspect is so hard, right, to solve. So in Mexico, there has been efforts to catalog genetic variation from indigenous populations that had much less admixture than others. There is no unadmixed person in this world, not even in Europe. So we are all admixed. So that obviously adds complication to this. So we tend to use proxies and whatnot for that, right? And in a way, you know, and this is very kind of difficult to what's the right term, right? Because in Mexico we say, oh, nativos americanos, or nativos mexicanos, or indigenous. Actually, that's el término que usamos. So we normally will say, so we said Native American, but that has a U.S. category connotation. Or should we use Amerindians, but that has a colonial connotation. Or should we use Indigenous American, which I think is a better term. And so there's all of this tension going, but I don't have the solution, but I just want to tell you that, first of all, this context is very different in other parts of the world, and I just want to make sure that we don't discourage the altruistic nature of people that want to contribute to biomedical research. For example, in the rare genetic disease area, if you ask a parent, hey, do you want me to give you the genome and share it with research? They immediately give it to you. They don't care about privacy and whatnot, right? They have something so important in their lives that all of these considerations are secondary, right? So I think people really want this to work, right? People donate their samples more because they want see the science progress. But clearly, taking advantage of that in the way that we're doing, well, welcome to capitalism, unfortunately. So how do we solve that is not going to be on our faults. But now, let's see the challenge.
Big time.
You just answered my question, so never mind. Just kidding. Did you want to go?
No, I think that was comprehensive. I mean, it's
Yeah.
complicated stuff.
I think we can wrap up the entire session. No.
Oh.
We have to thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.